An old tungsten bulb hung from the center of the room by a black wire flickering with a dim light. The silent atmosphere was like ink bleeding into clear water, spreading throughout the room. In the very center of the room was a large, battered Minos-looking round table. At its center stood a small tabletop clock with intricate patterns ticking away the seconds. 10 people in varied, somewhat tattered clothes were seated around the table, their faces smudged with dirt. Some were slumped over the table, others leaned back in their chairs, all of them fast asleep. Standing silently beside these 10 people was a man in a black suit wearing a goat Minos head mask. His gaze pierced through the dilapidated mask, studying the 10 individuals with great interest. The clock on the table chimed, its minute and our hands both pointing to the 12. From somewhere far beyond the room, the deep toll of a bell echoed. At that same moment, the men and women sitting around the round table slowly began to stir. As they gradually regained consciousness, they first looked around in a daze, then at each other in confusion. It seemed that none of them could remember why they were here. "Good morning, Unine," the goat Minos-headed man spoke first. "A pleasure to meet you all here. You've been sleeping before me for 12 hours now." The man's get-up was so bizarre it startled everyone under the dim light. His mask looked as if it were made from a real goat's head, with much of the fur yellowed and blackened, matted together in clumps. 2 holes were carved out for the eyes, revealing his own cunning gaze from within. With every gesture, he exuded not only the unique game-wise smell of a goat, but also a faint whiff of decay. A man with a floral Minos arm tattoo stared for a few seconds before the absurdity of the situation finally hit him. He asked the goat Minos-headed man hesitantly, "Who are you?" "I believe you all have that question, so allow me to introduce myself to the 9 of you," the goat Minos-headed man said, waving his hands cheerfully. It seemed he had long prepared his answer. A young man named Caleb sat furthest from the goat Minos-headed man. He quickly surveyed the room, and after a moment, his expression turned grim. Strange, he thought. This room is just too strange. There are no doors, just for walls. In other words, the room, its walls, ceiling, and floor was completely sealed, yet there was a table placed right in the middle. If that was the case, how did they get here? Were they brought in first and then the walls were built around them? Caleb looked around again. The floor, walls, and ceiling were all covered with intersecting horizontal and vertical lines, dividing the surfaces into large squares. Another thing that bothered Caleb was what the goat Minos-headed man had said, "9." No matter how he counted, there were N people sitting around the table. Including the goat Minos-headed man himself, there were 11 people in the room. What did 9 mean? He reached into his pocket just as he expected. His phone was gone. "You don't need to introduce yourself to us," a woman with a cool voice said to the goat Minos-headed man. "I suggest you stop what you're doing immediately. I suspect you've detained us for more than 20 Minos for hours, which constitutes unlawful detention. Every word you say now will be recorded and used as testimony against you." While she spoke, she fastidiously brushed the dust from her arm as if being dirty bothered her more than being held captive. The cool woman's words did snap the others to their senses. No matter who this person was, kidnapping 10 people at once had undoubtedly crossed a legal line. Wait a minute. A middle Minos-aged man in a white lab coat interrupted everyone's train of thought. He slowly turned to the cool woman and asked, "We all just woke up. How do you know we've been held for 20 Minos for hours?" His tone was calm and steady, but his question was razor Minos sharp. The cool woman, unfazed, pointed to the clock on the table and answered, "The clock here shows 12 o'clock. I have a habit of staying up late, and the last time I checked the time at home, it was already 12. That means we've been held for at least 12 hours. After she spoke, she pointed to the surrounding walls and continued, "You've all probably noticed that this room has no door, which means this person went to great lengths to get us in here. He said we were asleep for 12 hours, and now the clock points to 12 again. That's a jest. It's gone around at least twice. Therefore, I suspect it's been more than 20 Minos for hours. Is there a problem with that?" After hearing her explanation, the man in the white coat gave her a cold glance, his eyes still filled with suspicion. In a situation like this, after all, the woman was far too calm. Would a normal person react to a kidnapping by speaking with such composure? Just then, a sturdy young man in a black T Minos shirt asked, "Goat Minos-head, why did you say there are 9 people when there are 10 of us here?" The goat Minos-headed man remained silent, not answering immediately. "You son of a bitch, I don't give a damn how many people there are." The man with the floral Minos arm tattoo cursed. He pushed on the table trying to stand, but found his legs were weak and useless. He resorted to pointing at the goat Minos-headed man and yelling, "You piece of shit, you better get smart. You probably have no idea what the consequences are for messing with me. I will literally end you." His words made the expressions of the other men at the table turn serious. This was a time when they needed a leader. If they could work together to subdue this goat-headed man, the situation might still be controllable. But then they all discovered that their legs felt as if they'd been injected with something, completely devoid of strength. So the floral-armed man could only resort to verbal threats, shouting and cursing loudly at the goat-headed man. Caleb didn't speak, instead stroking his chin slightly as he stared thoughtfully at the clock on the table. Things didn't seem as simple as they appeared. He knew that what the goat-headed man meant was 9 participants. If there were 10 people here, it could only mean that one of them was not a participant. So who was it? There were 6 men, and for women sitting here, could one of them be a kidnapper? The goat-headed man, no longer speaking, slowly walked over to Caleb's side, stopping behind a young man. The others followed his gaze and realized that this young man was different from everyone else present. Though his face was also dirty, it was wreathed in a blissful smile. The goat-headed man slowly raised his hand and placed it on the back of the young man's head. The young man's smile grew even stranger as he glanced at the others with an excited look, as if he had known something all along. With a sickening thud, the goat-headed man slammed the young man's head onto the tabletop. A splash of pinkish-white matter, like paint being spilled, spread instantly across the table, spattering everyone's faces with droplets of blood. The young man's skull had been utterly crushed against the table. Outside, another distant bell toll echoed. Caleb was close to the deceased. He felt a warm, sticky, and fightable piece of matter land on his face. He had always considered himself to be mentally tough, but he never expected to be trembling like this. The girl sitting to the right of the dead man stared for 3 seconds before her face contorted and she let out a piercing scream. That scream shattered everyone's psychological defenses. To be able to smash the hardest bone in the human body against a table with one hand, was that goat-headed man even human? How could his slender frame unleash such immense power? The goat-headed man spoke slowly. The reason I prepared 10 people was because one of you was needed to make the rest of you quiet down. The woman's screamed, eyed away, and everyone's thoughts came to a screeching halt. The men who had been shouting and cursing moments before were now silent. This was no longer a matter of breaking the law. This monster in front of them would actually kill. After a full minute of silence, the goat-headed man nodded slightly. Very good. It seems the 9 of you have all quieted down. Everyone's faces paled, but no one dared to speak. Just as he said, there really were only 9 of them now. With a trembling hand, Caleb picked a pinkish-yellow piece of matter off his cheek. The piece of shattered brain was still warm to the touch and even seemed to twitch slightly, but after a few seconds, it went limp like a deflated ball, all life gone from it. Now, please allow me to introduce myself, the goat-headed man said, pointing a blood-soaked finger at his mask. I am the shepherd, and you are the participants. The group was stunned, then confused. The shepherd? Participants? I have gathered you all here today to participate in a game to ultimately create a god, the shepherd stated in a flat tone. These back statements made everyone frown. After these few minutes of interaction, they had all pretty much figured out that the man before them was a lunatic, but a lunatic who claimed he was going to create a god? Create? What god? The sturdy young man asked nervously. A god, just like Nuwa, the shepherd exclaimed, gesticulating wildly. He reeked of rot, and his voice carried a savage edge. How wonderful! You will witness history with us. The ancient goddess Nuwa created humanity, but she turned into a rainbow while mending the sky. We cannot lose Nuwa, so we must create a new one. There is a great task awaiting this god. His voice grew louder, his whole being seemingly supercharged with energy. Nuwa. The sturdy young man's brow furrowed, finding the whole thing incredibly hard to accept. He paused, then asked, "Are you some kind of cult?" A cult? The shepherd paused, turning to the young man. We are far grander than a cult. We have a world. After he said this, the group fell silent again. The sturdy man's question had been very pointed. The shepherd's actions were no different from those of a doomsday cult, yet most cults tended to invent new gods rather than opting a heroic figure like Nuwa. In that case, the sturdy man continued, "What do you want us to participate in here?" "I've already told you. It's just a game," the shepherd replied without hesitation. "If you win, one of you will become a god." Son of a bitch. The floral-armed man, Jax, seemed to have calmed down. He muttered curses under his breath. "So it's tryouts for godhood, is it? And what if we can't win?" "Can't win?" The shepherd looked at the blood on his hands, a disappointed look on his face. "If you can't win, that would be such a shame." Though he didn't say it outright, everyone understood his meaning. If you can't win, you die. The options he gave didn't include getting out alive. Either become what he called a god or end up like the young man with his head smashed open. If everyone understands, then let this game Officially begin. This game is called The Liar, the shepherd said, slowly pulling a stack of papers from his coat. He casually walked around to each person, placing one sheet in front of them. Then he took out several pens and distributed them. There was a lot of blood on the table, and as each white sheet was placed down, it became stained with red. When they turned the paper over and wiped it, the blood smeared like paint, making the white paper even redder. Next, I want each of you to tell a story about the last thing that happened to you before you came here. The shepherd continued, but be warned, among all the storytellers, one person has told a lie. After all 9 of you have told your stories, you will begin to vote. If all 8 people correctly identify the liar is eliminated and everyone else survives. If even one person votes incorrectly, the liar survives and everyone else is eliminated. The liar. The group was a bit puzzled. Would someone really lie at a time like this, with life and death on the line? Wait, can we discuss tactics? The sturdy man suddenly asked. As you wish, the shepherd nodded. Before the game begins, you have 1 minute to discuss tactics among yourselves. Would you like to use it now? Or save it for later? I want to use it now, the sturdy man said without a second thought. Be my guest. The shepherd took a step back away from the table. The sturdy man, Frank, pursed his lips and scanned the faces of the others, his gaze carefully avoiding the headless corpse slumped on the table. He began, I don't know which one of you is planning to lie, but this rule sounds too arbitrary. If just one person votes wrong, we all die. And even if we vote correctly, the liar still dies. It seems like someone will die no matter what. I thought of a way for all of us to survive. Hearing this, everyone turned to look at Frank. Was it possible for everyone to survive? We all tell the truth. Frank announced the answer before anyone could figure it out. All 9 of us tell the truth. Then, on the paper, write no one lied. This doesn't violate the rules, and we can all get out of this alive. The man in the white coat, Dr. Crane, tapped his fingers on the table for a moment before speaking. Your plan is good, but it rests on one premise that you yourself are not the liar. How are we supposed to trust you? If you are the liar, and we all write no one lied, then you'll be the only one who survives. What's that supposed to mean? Frank's face flushed with anger. If I were the liar, why would I suggest this? I'd only need to protect myself. The shepherd waved his hand slightly. 1 minute is up. Please stop talking. The 2 men both snorted coldly and fell silent. Now, please draw a card, the shepherd said, pulling his small stack of cards from his trouser pocket. The cards were about the size of playing cards with the words New War Game written on the back. Frank was taken aback. What are these? These are identity cards, the shepherd said with a loud laugh. If you draw the liar card, you must lie. Frank gritted his teeth. Are you messing with us? Why didn't you mention a rule like this earlier? This is to teach you a lesson, the shepherd said with a cold smile. I hadn't even finished explaining the rules when you asked if you could discuss tactics. You were the ones who wasted a precious minute, not me for failing to mention it earlier. Frank's face darkened, but remembering the shepherd's murderous methods, he swallowed his anger. Within a minute, all 9 people had drawn a card from the shepherd's hand, but no one dared to flip it over. If the card said liar, it would become a question of their life versus everyone else's. The 4 women's hands were trembling slightly, and the men's faces were grim. They weren't just drawing an identity, they were drawing life or death. Caleb took a deep breath, casually covering his card with his hand and sliding it in front of him. He carefully flipped it over. Emblazoned on it were the words, the liar. The liar. Caleb repeated the words in his mind several times, and after confirming his identity, he impassively flipped the card back over. Just a minute ago, he too had entertained the thought of everyone leaving alive. But things were different now. Though he didn't know the 8 people before him this time, they were the ones who had to die. If there are no objections, please remember the rule, there isn't only as one liar in this game. The shepherd said, pointing his finger at the voluptuous girl to Caleb's left. So we'll start with you and go clockwise. Huh? Me? The girl said, startled before pouting. Caleb glanced to his side. Starting with the girl to his left and going clockwise was not advantageous for him. He would be the last one to speak. In a state of extreme tension and pressure, people usually only remember the first and the last speakers. But to raise an objection now would make him stand out too much. He could only take it one step at a time. The girl, whom he recognized as the voluptuous one, furrowed her brow, her large eyes darting around. She finally sighed and said, fine, I'll go first. But I've been terrible at telling stories since I was a kid, so don't blame me if it's not very good. At this moment, no one knew what to say, they could only listen quietly. The girl with slender fingers tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear and began, my name is Candy and I'm a technical worker. We make a living with our skills and I'm not ashamed of it. It was only then that the others noticed that this girl named Candy was dressed very skimp ILY in just a dirty, low-minus cut mini dress that failed to cover what it was supposed to. But she didn't seem to care. Most of my stories aren't exactly fit to be shared with everyone. In short, you can ask me to do things, but asking me to describe them really leaves me at a loss for words. After all, if I had any culture, who would be in my line of work? Anyway, I was at work before I came here, but the client I had was a real weirdo. Our shop clearly provides a space for our services, but he insisted on going to his car, saying it would be more exciting. So for the money, I had no choice but to go with him. It was my first time working in a car. I never realized that a car that looked so fancy on the outside could be so cramped inside. It wasn't long before I was drenched in sweat. I really don't know what's so exciting about a crappy place like that. And during all this, the client's phone kept ringing, but he absolutely refused to answer it. It was driving me crazy. Candy seemed about to curse out the client some more, but her eyes accidentally fell on the corpse on the table and she flinched. She took a deep breath and said, forget it. I chose this line of work. I accept it. I just didn't expect a sudden earthquake. At first, I thought we were just moving too much, and that's why it was shaking so hard, but who knew it was a real earthquake? As soon as she said the word earthquake, everyone's expression shifted slightly as if they remembered something. Our car was parked in a small alley, and right above us was a huge billboard. At that moment, my head was sticking out of the car, so I saw it perfectly, Candy said, her voice trembling as she gestured above her head. For some reason, that giant billboard just snapped with a clang and fell right onto the car. And then I lost consciousness. She let out another long breath. When I woke up, I was here. I was so scared. Candy put on a pitiful expression, one that looked well minus practice to make men's hearts flutter. The man with the floral minus arm tattoo, Jax, sitting beside her, paused for a moment and said, "Everyone, do we even need to continue?" Dr. Crane was taken aback, looking at Jax. "What do you mean? This lady is already lying. We can just vote now," Jax said with complete confidence. "You, what are you talking about?" Candy was shocked. "Where did I lie?" Jax gave Candy a cold look and said, "Your name. You said your name is Candy, but all hostesses and escorts use fake names. Names like Candy, Fifi, Lulu are very common. So you hid your real name, which means you've already lied." With that one sentence, Candy's face flushed red. "You, what nonsense are you spouting? My name is Candy. I haven't used my real name in years." After saying this, she looked around at everyone and added, "At my workplace, you can only find me by asking for Candy. No one would know me by my real name." Everyone began to ponder this, and Caleb's expression also grew serious. From Candy's story, Caleb couldn't detect any sense of deception. Her storytelling pace was steady, and her tone was relaxed. This kind of narrative style, like chatting with a friend, could only mean one of two things. Either she had fabricated this story long ago and told it to herself many times, or she was telling the truth. But now, Jax had given Caleb a new line of thought: lying about one's name. A lie about a name doesn't require logic or plausibility, making it very difficult for most people to spot the deception. After all, no one here had ever met before, and they could only learn each other's names through what was said. Caleb carefully recalled the shepherd's words: among all the storytellers, one person has told a lie. This rule didn't specify that the liar had to use a false story to lie. A false name would also apply. Seeing that she was under suspicion, Candy's eyes wide and looking extremely nervous. If you still don't believe me, my real name is Jenna Zhang. I'm from Shaanxi province. You can try calling me by my real name, but I won't respond. I only respond to Candy." Hearing this, Caleb silently shook his head. This woman wasn't as clever as he'd thought. This meant it was impossible for her to have prepared this lie in advance, and even less likely that she could have come up with the name light acting on the spot. The shepherd had said, "There isn't only is one liar. That person could only be Caleb himself." If no one else had noticed the gravity of the Candy issue, then he had just found a surefire way to win. If he were to make up a name, Caleb wasn't a great choice of surname. While not rare, it wasn't exactly common either. He should avoid a name that was easy to remember. In other words, everything he said had to be as unappatable as possible. So he decided to call himself Li Ming. He could tell the rest of his story truthfully, and then even the most brilliant person wouldn't be able to see through his deception. The game was already over. At that moment, Jax raised his hand and looked at the shepherd. "Hey, Riff, how do you handle cases like this where someone has a professional name? Does that count as lying?" The shepherd neither nodded nor shook his head, simply stating flatly, "I will no longer participate in the proceedings. You just need to write down a name according to your own judgment. Just remember, the rules are absolute. In the end, I will personally carry out the punishment on the loser. The word punishment was delivered with such force that it sent a shiver down everyone's spine. See, this proves I didn't lie, Candy shouted anxiously. If I had lied, I'd be dead by now, right? Even if it's a fake name, my fake name really is Candy. No one answered her. This was now a life minus or minus death situation, and no point of suspicion could be overlooked. Then it's my turn to talk, Jack said with a smirk, looking reluctant. If this lady's story doesn't count as a lie, then mine effingly won't either. My name is Jax. I live in Guangdong, and I don't have a real job. Before I came here, I was collecting a debt. JX's Mandarin was quite poor, so the others had to listen carefully. People these days are really something else. They'll promise you anything when they're borrowing money, but the moment it's time to pay up, they start crying poor. The bastards, he spat. They call debt collectors like us demons, cold-blooded. But that piece of shit should try looking at it from another angle. When he was at his most helpless, most desperate for cash, I was the one who extended a helping hand. When no other institution would lend him money, I did. To him, I wasn't a demon, I was a savior. But how does he treat his savior? He runs around crying poor, talking about how hard his life is, how he was scammed out of $2 million. Then he rails against us debt collectors for being so heartless, trying to use the sympathy of his neighbors to solve his own problems. But we signed a contract when he borrowed the money, and we told him the interest rates clearly. Now that he can't pay it back, it's our problem. Last night I was going to teach him a lesson. I took him to the rooftop of a tall building, but then an earthquake suddenly hit. I wasn't planning on killing him, but that bastard took advantage of the chaos to pull out a knife and try to kill me. In the middle of the confusion, he pushed me off the rooftop. I crashed into a billboard. The rest, I can't remember. After hearing the man's story, everyone frowned. But Candy seemed to have discovered something, and she let out an angry laugh. See, now I know why you were trying to sling mud at me. It turns out you're the one who's the liar. What? On what grounds do you say I'm lying? Jack said menacingly. I'm in Shaanxi, you're in Guangdong. Candy pointed at him and said, you basically just copied my story. I was in an earthquake, and suddenly you were in one too. I got hit by a billboard, and you crashed into one too. If that's not a lie, what is? Who cares where you were? I was in an earthquake. Plain and simple, Jax retorted, his eyes wide. If I hid that fact, then that would be lying. As for the billboard, it's not like there's only one in the entire world, is there? You're just a liar. Candy insisted, pointing at Jax. Your profession is something only bad people do, so it's not strange for you to lie. And your profession is so much better than mine? Kale watched the two argue fiercely, feeling that something was indeed a bit strange. It wasn't because he thought one of them was lying, but because he had also experienced an earthquake. And he was neither in Shaanxi nor Guangdong, but in Shandong. Could an earthquake of such a massive scale even exist in this world? An earthquake that spanned half the country, affecting 3 provinces. If they were all telling the truth, wouldn't this be an unprecedented catastrophe? Stop arguing. Let's just get this over with. The sturdy man Frank reprimanded the two of them. He then looked at the next girl. It's your turn. If we really want to judge who's lying, we might as well wait until everyone has spoken. The two of them snorted coldly at his words and fell silent. The woman beside Jax, Paige, nodded timidly and began to speak. Linus, my name is Paige. I'm a kindergarten teacher. It was clear that the girl named Paige was terrified. Her voice was small and trembling. Before I came here, I was waiting with a child for their parents. The child's mother used to pick him up, but I heard she fell gravely ill, something growing in her brain that required surgery. So for the past few days, the father has been picking him up, but it seems he often forgets to come. Yesterday it was already past 6 in the evening, well past my work hours, but for some reason, the child's father just wouldn't answer his phone. I didn't know the child's home address, so I couldn't take him home. I could only stand at the intersection with him and wait. I actually had plans that night. I had an appointment with a psychologist. I've been feeling like I don't really like my current job, and I was hoping a psychologist could help me sort things out. But I never expected to wait for hours. My evening appointment was ruined. Just as my mind was wandering, the whole ground suddenly started to shake. I was terrified. It took me a few seconds to realize it was an earthquake. The feeling of an earthquake is different from what you hear about. The ground doesn't jolt up and down, it waves from side to side. It felt like I was standing on a table and someone was constantly shaking it. My first instinct was to hold the child next to me in my arms, but I didn't know what to do. I saw the famous Changsheng Temple 3 pagodas cracking in the distance. Luckily, we were in an open area. Then I saw a car out of control speeding right towards us. I could only stumble and run to the side while holding the child, but the swaying ground made me fall with every step. The last time I fell, I hit my head and passed out immediately. When I woke up, I was here. It was an unremarkable story. The only thing that struck Caleb as strange was the Chongsheng Temple 3 pagodas. Those 3 pagodas were in Dali, you know. Caleb gently stroked the card on the table. Although his hand covered the 3 words, he knew what was written there, the liar. So could there be multiple liars? If the rules are absolute, then what the shepherd had just said there is, and only as one liar was absolute. Since he had drawn the liar card, it proved that the others could not be liars. There was only one. They were all telling the truth. But these stories, spanning 3 different provinces, were faintly connected. It wasn't just the earthquake, even the content of their stories was linked. Wasn't that just strange? At this point, everyone's gaze turned to the next person, the middle-aged man in the white lab coat. The man in the white coat, Dr. Crane, seemed even calmer than the others. Even the corpse on the table couldn't affect him. My name is Drive Miles Crane. I'm a doctor. You should be able to tell from my attire. He tugged at his own early white coat and continued. Before I came here, I was performing surgery on a female patient. The lady had an intravare occurrent tumor. The tumor was growing rapidly, continuously enlarging over the past 6 months, and had already caused mild hydrocephalus. If we didn't perform a craniodiopy soon, her life would be in danger. I chose a frontal lobe approach using CT guidance to perform a direct puncture to the ventricle. To be honest, this kind of surgery carries significant risks every time, but the lady chose to take the risk in order to be there for her young son for a long time. Normally, an operating room has to be a perfectly stable environment without so much as a breeze. But none of us expected something far more powerful than the wind to arrive. When the earthquake hit, I had just removed the lady's skull cap and was cutting the dura mater. A mistake at this step could easily cause a cerebral contusion, leaving devastating after-minus effects. I made an immediate decision to terminate the surgery and temporarily place the lady's skull cap back. Otherwise, in an environment filled with dust, the lady's life would be in peril. But I never imagined this step would be much more difficult than I thought. I couldn't even stand steady, so how could I possibly place a small piece of skull back with precision? The nurses beside me were bumping into me, and no one could keep their balance. In the panic, I could only cover the lady's head with a sterile sheet first, then immediately turn to organize an evacuation. But just then, I was hit in the leg by a medical cart and fell to the floor. Before I could get back up, the ceiling of the operating room cracked open, and I immediately lost consciousness. After listening to the doctor's story, everyone's expression was a bit unnatural. He had used a lot of medical terminology in his account. If even one of those terms was made up, no one here would be able to tell. Dr. Crane, where are you from? Frank asked casually. I don't feel I have an obligation to answer your question, Dr. Crane replied. I finished my story. Frank opened his mouth but said nothing. Is it my turn? A boy with glasses asked, his eyes darting around for a moment. My name is Leo Han. Wait, the shepherd suddenly spoke, interrupting Leo's speech. This startled Leo, who turned his head in confusion. What is it? It's time for intermission, the shepherd said with a smirk. We will now take a 20-minute break. Everyone was at a loss. There was an intermission at a time like this? Caleb glanced at the clock in the center of the table. Half an hour had passed since they woke up. It was now 12-30. So this break is mandatory, Caleb thought to himself. When it hits 12-30, no matter who is speaking, there's a mandatory 20-minute break. But the game had only been going for 30 minutes. And now the break alone was 20 minutes. Caleb frowned, but he knew this wasn't something he should be pondering. The host of this game was a madman. There was no point in trying to understand him with a sane person's logic. So he could only repeat to himself in his mind, over and over again, my name is Li Ming. I'm from Shandong. Only by drilling this phrase into his mind countless times could he blurt it out when it was his turn to speak. The rest of the group waited quietly, their faces troubled. It was called an intermission, but the atmosphere had only grown more oppressive. Excuse me, can we talk? Frank asked the shepherd. Oh, of course. This is your free time. I have no right to interfere. Frank nodded, then turned back to Drive Crane. Dr. Crane, where are you from? Dr. Crane's face darkened. I must say, you seem to have had a problem with me from the very beginning. Why must I tell you where I'm from? Don't misunderstand, I mean no harm, Frank said in a steady voice. The more you say, the more credible you sound. Since everyone else has said where they're from, there's no need for you to hide it, is there? The more I say, the more credible I sound. The doctor shook his head dismissively. All I know is that the more you say, the more you slip up. If the rules are absolute, then my story as it stands has no issues. Besides, I don't trust any of you. That's a bit biased, Frank said. There are 9 of us here, and only one is the enemy. If you're willing to cooperate with everyone, we can work together to find that liar. The more you hide now, the more suspicious you become. This is the second time I've asked you. Are you still going to hide it? Frank seemed highly skilled at interrogation, cornering Drive Crane with just a few sentences. His meaning was clear: only the liar wouldn't need to trust others, since he already knew his own identity. If the doctor continued to conceal this information, he would become the target of everyone's suspicion. But a man who could become a brain surgeon was no fool. He just let out a cold snort and asked, "Then you answer me first. Who are you? What do you do?" "Me?" Frank was caught off guard by the doctor's sudden counter-minus attack, his expression a bit unnatural. "That's right. Since you're so persistent in questioning me after I've told my story, then I can question you before you tell yours," Dr. Crane said with a small smile. "Fair, isn't it?" Frank thought for a moment, then nodded. "You're right. I have nothing to hide. My name is Frank Miller. I'm a detective." As soon as he said it, everyone turned to look at him. At a time like this, the word detective gave everyone an unimaginable sense of security. "You're a cop?" the doctor exclaimed, stunned. No wonder this man seemed to be probing for information from the very beginning. He was also the first one to suggest a plan to let everyone survive. Maybe he really did want to save everyone. The doctor's attitude clearly softened. "If that's the case, then I apologize for my earlier attitude. I'm from Jiangsu province." At this, Jax, the man with the floral minus arm tattoo, looked displeased. "Hey, Dr. Crane, are you really going to trust this Detective Miller?" Dr. Crane looked at Jax, confused. "What are you trying to say?" Jax tapped his fingers on the table and said lightly, "This isn't storytelling time right now. In other words, anyone can lie at this moment. Don't you try to stir up trouble, kid," Detective Miller said, glaring at Jax sternly. "You're a loan shark, and I'm a cop. Who do you think everyone's going to believe?" Caleb watched the arguing crowd. Knowing that Detective Miller was probably not lying, he really was a detective. But his direction was wrong. Perhaps it was his professional instinct, or perhaps his sense of justice, but he was constantly trying to organize the group. The intermission was already half over, and the crowd gradually fell silent. During this time, Caleb had repeated my name is Li Ming to himself so many times that he was getting sick of it. After all, a corpse with a crushed skull was slumped right next to him, making it impossible to quiet his mind. Blood dripped from the table onto the floor, drip by drip. The group had been sharing the room with this corpse for nearly an hour, and a strange, foul odor began to spread. Caleb casually glanced at the corpse beside him. Its pants were filthy. After death, various organs lose the constraint of muscle control, leading to incontinence. Before the smell of decomposition could set in, the stench of excrement had already hit them. Caleb and another girl were sitting on either side of the corpse. The girl seemed very unhappy with the smell, constantly covering her nose and mouth with her hand. Another 10 minutes passed. The shepherd finally spoke. "The 20-minute intermission is over. The game will now resume." The young man named Leo Han composed himself, took a deep breath, and said, "My name is Leo Han. I'm a wit novel writer. Before I came here, I was in my rented apartment writing the finale of a novel. Since there were over 100 characters in the book, and almost all of them had to appear in the finale, I was completely focused on writing and didn't hear any noise from outside at all. I don't even know when the earthquake happened or when I lost consciousness." The story Leo told was different from everyone else's. So far, he seemed to be completely separate, and his account came to an abrupt end after just a few sentences. "That's it?" Frank was slightly taken aback. "You just ended by saying, 'Don't know?' Because I can't lie. I don't need to invent an answer just to cater to everyone," Leo said. His voice was not loud, but it was strangely convincing. "All right. Next then," Detective Miller said, his expression still tinged with suspicion, and turned to the next woman. "It's your turn." "Hey, Cop Jack," said, his tone showing his dissatisfaction with Detective Miller's attitude. "We're all participants here. Don't act like you're the captain. Someone has to step up and organize everyone, right?" Detective Miller retorted. "I've said it before, there's only one enemy among us. The other 8 of us have to stick together." "That still doesn't give you the right to give orders," Jack said, completely dismissing the detective's words. "I might be afraid of you on the outside, but in a situation like this, nobody knows if you're the liar or not." "Will you two stop arguing?" the cool woman Claire interrupted them. This was the woman who, from the very beginning, had accused the shepherd of holding them captive for 20-4 hours. She appeared logical and extremely calm. Seeing the 2 men quiet down, she continued, "In this O- called game, no matter who wins in the end, the rest of us could be considered accessories to murder. After all, it's our collective vote that makes the shepherd kill him. That's the problem you should be considering. Her words made Caleb's expression shift slightly. If he really did get out of this room alive, he would indeed have killed the other 8 people. But what else could he do? The card in front of him was a genuine liar card. Who would be willing to voluntarily give up their own life so that others could live? My name is Claire. I'm a lawyer, the cool woman said, her arms crossed and her face devoid of expression. It's a shame to meet you all in such a buzzer place. Otherwise, I would have certainly offered you my business card. The others couldn't appreciate Claire's sense of humor, but she didn't seem to care. Before I came here, I was organizing case files for a trial. My client was scammed out of 2 million yuan. The amount involved was huge, and the nature of the crime was heinous. As she said the words "2 million," everyone's expression remained normal, but Jax was visibly shocked. He asked, 2 million? That's right, 2 million. People say lawyers are the most impartial, but we have our private feelings too. That man, to support his family, went so far as to take out a high-minus interest loan. It's very worrying. But illegal lending is a separate case and has nothing to do with me. When the earthquake hit, I was driving to meet my client on Qingyang Avenue. I just passed the new Futhatch cottage near the Wuhu Shrine area. I remember. I wasn't driving fast, maybe around 40 kilometers an hour, when I suddenly saw the ground crack open a short distance ahead. I immediately slammed on the brakes and came to a steady stop in front of the fissure. But I never expected the car behind me to fail to swerve in time, causing a chain-minus reaction rear-minus end collision. All I heard were a few loud bangs as my car was pushed into the fissure. Then I lost consciousness and ended up here. Another story finished. Now, only 3 people were left to speak. The Wuhu Shrine. Dr. Crane mused. Is that the one in Chengdu? Yes, I work in Chengdu. It seemed this earthquake had spread across the entire country. Trying to guess who was lying based on these fragmented, unfamiliar stories was just too difficult. Next up is me, Detective Miller said, looking at the group. I've already told you my name. I'm Frank Miller, the detective from Inner Mongolia. Before I came here, I was on a stakeout for a fraudster. We had reliable intelligence and had pinpointed the suspect's exact whereabouts. This suspect was involved in a massive fraud case amounting to million yuan. It was the first major fraud case our city had handled this year. My partner and I were monitoring from the car, just waiting for the fraudster to show up. But the suspect was even smarter than we'd imagined. He seemed to have sensed danger and didn't show his face for 3 straight days. For 3 days, we ate, drank, and relieved ourselves in the car. We were on the verge of a mental breakdown. But you know what's worse for a grown man than having no food or drink? It's having no cigarettes. Between the 2 of us, we didn't have a single cigarette left. By principle, we absolutely could not leave our post, but the craving for a cigarette was unbearable. So I sent my partner on a run to buy cigarettes while I kept a close watch on the entrance to the suspect's residence. But what I didn't expect was that not long after my partner left, the entire ground began to shake violently. I was about to get out of the car to see what was happening when I was suddenly strangled from behind by a thin cord. Although we are both skilled in close combat, a thin cord pulled from the back seat of a car is extremely difficult to deal with. I couldn't touch the person behind me at all, nor could I get the cord off my neck. At this, the group stared at Detective Miller and noticed a distinct red line around his neck. So I immediately reclined the seat, which allowed me to breathe again. But I couldn't turn around, being a big guy. My legs were stuck under the steering wheel. While I was lying back, the person behind me took the opportunity to hit me hard on the head with something, and I lost consciousness. After hearing Detective Miller's story, the group became suspicious. He had described a completely different situation. Before him, every participant had been injured and knocked unconscious due to an accident. He was the only one who had been attacked by a person before ending up here. If they had to choose the most suspicious person among them, wouldn't it be him? You're lying, cop, Jack said in a cold voice. I knew you'd say that. But what proof do you have that I'm lying? Just because someone attacked me? Of course not, Jack said with a small smile. I don't know why, but all the stories told before have been connected in some way or another. There are many shared characters in these stories. If we ignore the geographical locations, everyone's accounts are plausible. So what? That's where the problem is, Jack said, pointing a finger at the lawyer, Claire. You and the lawyer have a common character in your stories, the fraudster who scammed 2 million. But your stories contradict each other. This means one of you is lying. Detective Miller paused as well, then asked, where's the contradiction? Jack shook his head and looked at the detective. The lawyer, Claire, was already preparing for trial, which means in her story, the suspect has been caught. But you are still on a stakeout, which means in your story, the suspect has not yet been apprehended. Isn't that a contradiction? Detective Miller thought for a moment before speaking. I have to say, your point has some merit, but I think you're being influenced by this game. First, you need to understand the main premise, which is that all the previous storytellers are not in the same city as anyone else. In other words, no matter how similar our experiences are, we are definitely not talking about the same event. Since they are different events, they will naturally have different outcomes. Caleb quietly watched the two men who were constantly arguing without interrupting. Yes, argue. The more fiercely you argue, the better. If either of them voted for the other, the liar would win. After all, the rules were absolute. Apart from the liar, if any one person voted incorrectly, everyone else would be condemned along with them. Although Detective Miller had given an explanation, JAX's words had left an impression on everyone. After all, this was the first time they had discovered contradictory plots between two people's stories. Caleb couldn't help but feel a new level of respect for this gangster named Jax. He might seem wild and unrestrained, but he was smarter than he looked. "Oh, is it my turn?" a young woman said. The group finally snapped out of their thoughts and looked at her. This was the girl who had screamed violently when the first person died. She seemed to have calmed down now, though her gaze carefully avoided looking to her side. "Hello everyone, my name is Pomona Lynn. I'm a psychologist." Caleb paused slightly because the name Pomona was interesting. In Greco-Roman mythology, Pomona was the goddess of fruit trees and abundance. It was a name rich, with poetic meaning, making it memorable. Perhaps this means Lynn's parents wanted their daughter to have a unique name, but it was very likely that this name would be her downfall here. Among the people present were a writer, a teacher, a lawyer, a doctor, and a cop. It was possible that any of them would recognize the name's significance. If they dwelled on this name for just a few moments, Pomona's story would become deeply ingrained in their minds. Seeing that the group had no reaction, Pomona continued, covering her nose and mouth with her hand. "I'm from Ninkia. Before I came here, I was waiting for a client. She was a kindergarten teacher." The group, now used to this, glanced at the kindergarten teacher named Paige. Once again, the stories were connected. According to her, the kindergarten teaching profession is very difficult these days. You can't hit the children and you can't scold them. Parents treat the teachers like nannies and the children treat them like servants. Every classroom has a surveillance camera installed which parents monitor in real time. If your tone is even slightly stern, a parent will call the principal. But don't parents send their children to kindergarten to help them establish their values? If teachers can't be strict, then how can children recognize their mistakes? She felt that for a long time she had been in a state of confusion and depression. So I prepared a treatment plan for her that would last about a month. But for some reason, that client never showed up for her appointment, so I just kept waiting in my office. When the earthquake hit, I had no chance to escape. After all, my office is on the 20-6th floor. The higher the floor, the stronger the tremors. I felt like the entire building was shaking. I never knew Ninkia could have earthquakes before. This was my first time experiencing one. After that, I vaguely remember the ceiling collapsing. Everything went black, and then I knew nothing. After hearing Pomona's story, everyone seemed to have another thought. Jax was the first to speak. "I have 2 questions." "Go ahead," Pomona said, still covering her nose and mouth. "You said every classroom has a surveillance camera installed. What do you mean by that?" No one expected this to be JAX's point of focus, but Pomona, befitting a psychologist, answered very patiently. "I imagine the surveillance cameras were installed so the parents could see the classroom footage from anywhere. Circuit TV, huh? Must be a fancy kindergarten." Jax muttered to himself, then asked, "And the kindergarten teacher you were supposed to meet, was it this one, Paige next to you?" "I don't know about that," Pomona said, shaking her head. "I only added that person on a messaging app. We were planning to discuss the details when we met." "A messaging app?" Jax was momentarily confused, as if he didn't understand. Detective Miller raised a hand to interrupt them. "You're at it again, gangster. Paige is in Yunnan, and this drive Lynn is in Ninkia. Who would travel that far to see a psychologist?" Jax was not to be outdone. "I just think it's suspicious. This is the first time someone's story has mentioned another participant." This time, Dr. Crane thought Jax had a point and nodded in agreement. He asked Paige, "Were your reasons for seeking a psychologist the same as what this drive Lynn described?" Paige hesitated meekly for a moment before saying, "Not exactly. I was feeling a bit depressed because I was being constantly criticized by a parent." "Then that proves it was just a coincidence," Dr. Crane nodded. "After all, these are events into different regions. There's no need for us to force a connection." At this, everyone fell silent for a moment, but then the lawyer Claire suddenly spoke up. "Ms. Lynn, half of the story you just told was about that kindergarten teacher. Isn't that against the rules?" "Huh?" Pomona was slightly taken aback. I talked about the teacher to give you all a better understanding of what my job entails. Don't misunderstand me, I don't mean anything by it, Claire said with a smile. What I mean to say is, if the teacher's experience was something you made up, it would naturally conflict with Paige's story, which would in turn prove that you were lying. Pomona didn't expect the woman before her to be so aggressive. She could only argue Dr. Crane and Detective Miller just said, our provinces are different. These are all just coincidences. Coincidences, are they? Claire said, her arms crossed as she continued. Think about it carefully. Why were the 9 of us specifically gathered here? Don't forget we are 9 strangers. If we are to find the flaws in each other's stories, we must be given some clues. And this clue is that everyone's stories are connected. After listening to everyone's story, I feel like we were deliberately chosen. This is so we can successfully spot the flaws in each other's stories and find the liar. Otherwise, this game would be too absurd because the liar's chances of winning would be far too great. This speech was like a wake minus a call for everyone, including Caleb. Yes, the liar's chances of winning were indeed too great. Caleb frowned. Why were his chances of winning so high? When lying to a group of strangers who didn't know him or anything about him, anyone could easily fabricate a lie that would be almost impossible to see through. Could using a fake name really be enough to send 8 people to their deaths, or was it that the person who drew the liar card was the chosen one, that this was an unfair game from the start? No, Caleb thought to himself. If drawing the card was enough to guarantee survival, they might as well have written life and death on the cards directly. That would be an easier way to achieve their goal. Otherwise, what would be the point of this nearly hour-minus long game? A deep sense of dissonance spread through him. Caleb replayed every word the shepherd had said in his mind. Could it be? Hey, it's your turn, Jack said, nudging Caleb. He finally snapped back to reality, realizing everyone was looking at him with strange expressions. It was too late to think any further now doing, so it would only make him look more suspicious. He composed himself and reorganized his thoughts. The phrase, my name is Li Ming, I'm from Shandong, kept echoing in his mind. But at this moment, he absolutely could not use that answer. To find the solution to this game, he had to take a gamble. Caleb opened his eyes and said to the group, everyone, my name is Caleb. I'm from Shandong and I'm a professional con man. A con man? Upon hearing just the first sentence of Caleb's story, everyone in the room gasped in unison. After all, the character of a con man had appeared in many of their stories. This command also faintly tied everyone's stories together. The greater irony was that now they had to judge whether a con man was telling the truth. Before I came here, I was trying to find a way to launder the $2 million I had on my hands. It took quite a bit of effort, but in the end, I got $1,400,000. That was the most cost-minus effective method I could think of. But on my way back with the money, I was suddenly caught in an earthquake. As I reached my front door, I saw my house shaking constantly. Normally, in a situation like that, you should absolutely not enter a building after all. There's a risk of collapse at any moment. But I was very worried about the person inside, so I had no choice but to rush in. Sure enough, just as I entered the house, the doorway collapsed. I was pinned and I lost consciousness. Caleb told his story in a flat tone in just a few sentences. When he finished, everyone stared at him warily. He knew he was taking a huge risk, but this was the only way to verify if his idea was correct. If the shepherd spoke up right now, it would mean his guess was more or less right. Just as Caleb had thought, the shepherd slowly walked forward and said to the group, very good. All of you have now told your stories. Next is a 20-minute free discussion period. After 20 minutes, each of you will be required to write a name on the white paper in front of you. I knew it. Caleb's brow lifted. I knew there'd be another 20 minutes. This explained everything. The group was now in a panic. After all, there were only 20 minutes left before their fate would be decided. Japs and Frank Miller both wanted to vote for each other, perhaps due to their professions. The two were filled with mutual animosity. Dr. Crane began to question the writer, Leo, since Leo's story had no connection to anyone else's. The lawyer, Claire, and the teacher, Paige, seemed to be suspicious of Caleb, while Pomona, Leo, and Candy were still undecided. According to the surface rules, the liar was about to win this game, because the votes would not be unanimous. The rules were very clear. Only if everyone chose the liar could the 8 of them survive together. Caleb did not participate in any of the discussions, silently closing his eyes. Countless clues swirled in his mind. The shepherd said, among the storytellers, there isn't only is one liar. The shepherd said, the rules are absolute. The shepherd said, you have all been asleep for 12 hours. Caleb opened his eyes. He was only missing one last piece of information, and then this problem would be solved. But where was that information? Suddenly, a flash of insight sparked in his mind. The intersecting lines on the walls and floor made him instantly clear-headed. He glanced at the clock on the table. It was almost 1 o'clock. So that's how it is. Caleb's eyes widened. That was close. I'm supposed to be the con man, but I was almost conned by you all. The others seemed to notice Caleb's strange behavior. This con man had spoken very little from the beginning, and no one knew what he was really thinking. Hey, can I get another piece of paper? Caleb asked the shepherd. Hearing this, the shepherd was clearly taken aback, then asked tentatively, You want another piece of paper? Yes, Caleb nodded. I need a piece of scratch paper. The shepherd was silent for a long time before pulling another sheet of paper from his suit pocket and handing it to Caleb. Caleb didn't hesitate, taking the paper and starting his calculations. He counted the large squares on the walls 9 in total, then the squares on the floor and ceiling 16 in total. If I'm not mistaken, Caleb wrote quickly, the squares are 1 square meter each, which means we are in a room that is 3 meters high and 4 meters long and wide. 4 times 4 times 3. 40 minus 8 cubic meters. Caleb's hand trembled slightly. It's not enough. It's not nearly enough. The others stared at Caleb, confused. This was supposed to be about figuring out who was lying, but he was doing math problems. They watched as he wrote out several more vertical equations, finally arriving at the numbers 50 for 0.6 and 49.14. When he saw these two numbers, Caleb's face went ashen as if he were trying to accept something. If his guess was completely correct, then the current situation was terrifying. His eyes darted back and forth, his thoughts already a million miles away. The sound of the others' arguments gradually died down. This man before them was not participating in any discussion, just constantly calculating something. Had he really found the answer to this problem? After a long while, he finally looked up at the group. His eyes were filled with fear, hesitation, suspicion, and confusion. Everyone, Caleb cleared his throat and said in a low voice, I didn't want to save you, but if you choose wrong, I'll die too. I absolutely cannot die here. Someone is waiting for me outside, so I have to find a way out no matter what. I could only announce the answer now, and I hope you will listen to me carefully. Mate, what do you mean, the answer? Jax, who was closest to Caleb, was slightly taken aback. You know who's lying? Caleb didn't answer, simply picking up his identity card and slowly revealing it to everyone. This is the identity I drew. Everyone stared, and the words the liar on the card were particularly striking. After seeing these 3 words, everyone's expression was one of astonishment. I drew the liar, Caleb said slowly. But it doesn't matter whether I show this card or not, because it's not important at all. He picked up a card and casually tossed it into the center of the table. If I'm not mistaken, every single one of you is holding a liar card. After hearing this, no one moved. After a while, Detective Miller finally spoke. So, are you saying everyone lied just now? That's right, Caleb nodded. You are all more clever than I imagined. You all inserted a small lie into your stories, allowing the narrative to hold up completely without affecting the plot's logic. Detective Miller thought for a moment, and he seemed to have realized something as well. If what you're saying is true, he said with a deep sigh, then the problem is even trickier. The others looked at Detective Miller confused. Detective Miller continued, according to the rules, we can only survive together if all of us vote for the liar. But if that's the case, the liar loses. So Dr. Crane was the first to understand Detective Miller's meaning. Are you saying we can vote for anyone we want? Because everyone is lying, this becomes a guaranteed win game, and only the person who gets voted for has to die? Exactly, Detective Miller nodded. The best plan now is to concentrate all the votes on one person. This will minimize our losses. After all, the rest of us can live. His words plunged the room into an even deeper state of oppression. Meanwhile, the shepherd made no move at all. So are they just voting for one of them to die? Caleb let out a helpless sigh and looked at the detective. Officer, is interrupting people a hobby of yours? Does it give you a sense of accomplishment? What's that supposed to mean? Detective Miller replied with a frown. Aren't I trying to help you come up with a plan? I don't need your help, Caleb said without a second thought. Your idea will get everyone killed. What? Detective Miller was stunned. Why would I get everyone killed? Am I wrong? If everyone is lying, wouldn't any vote be valid? Detective Miller, the shepherd, said the rules are absolute and there isn't only as one liar. Do you remember? Well, Detective Miller hesitated for a moment, recalling that the shepherd had indeed said those 2 things. Let me sort this out for everyone now, Caleb said coldly. In this game, it looks like a liar has a huge advantage because everyone feels like they're about to win. But if we vote randomly, all of us will end up dead. Jax, sitting next to Caleb, rubbed his tatted arm and muttered to himself because we'd be breaking the rules. Yes, Caleb nodded. But the interesting thing about this game is that we have no way of deciding whether someone else is lying. Just as the lawyer Claire said, we can only deduce based on whether our experiences contradict each other. But we're not even from the same region. No matter how contradictory our stories are, we can't be 100% sure that the other person is lying. Caleb looked at the pensive group and then added, the organizer specifically chose the 9 of us to sit here for a reason. And that reason is to make us find flaws in what seem to be interconnected stories based on our own assumptions. But is that really correct? What guarantee do we have that someone is definitely lying? Caleb let out a cold laugh. In this game, the only liar we can identify with 100% certainty based on the known clues is this person. What he said is completely different from our current situation. Caleb picked up his pen and with a few quick strokes wrote the words "the shepherd" on the paper. I was wondering before why the shepherd would introduce us to such a strange name like the shepherd at the very beginning. It seemed completely unnecessary. Now, I realize it was also part of the game. The group slowly turned to look at the shepherd, who still made no move. Detective Miller was stunned for a moment, then shook his head. "Command, I have a question. The rule the shepherd stated was, among all the storytellers, there isn't only as one liar. But he didn't tell a story, didn't he?" Caleb shrugged. "Non-committal lie. As I recall, the shepherd clearly said he gathered us here to create a god. Isn't that an outlandish story?" Detective Miller silently lowered his head. He felt that what Caleb said made a lot of sense, but something still felt off. "But," Dr. Crane spoke up, "all of your assumptions are based on the premise that everyone is a liar. But why are you so certain we're all liars? What if we flip over our cards and you're the only liar? It's impossible that you told the truth," Caleb said with a bitter laugh, his expression one of despair. "I spent some time verifying this question as well. I not only know that you all lied, but I also know where you lived." He pushed his scratch paper forward and looked at Candy beside him. "Candy, you were working in the car with your head sticking out. Did the falling billboard really just hit the car and knock you unconscious?" Candy pursed her lips, not daring to speak. "Jax, you fell from such a height onto a billboard. Were you really just knocked unconscious?" Jax remained silent. "Teacher Paige, you were with that child. Did you really dodge that speeding car?" Paige's eyes darted away. "Dr. Crane, an operating room is built to be much sturdier than a normal room to maintain stability, yet you said the ceiling collapsed. Were you really just knocked out?" Dr. Crane turned his head to the side. "Leo, you said you had no idea what happened. But when you're focused on writing, the last thing you want is a disturbance. Are you sure you don't know how you got here?" Leo sighed softly. "Lawyer Claire, your car was pushed into a fissure. How deep was that fissure?" Claire's arms remained crossed, her face impassive. "Detective Miller, what brand of car were you driving? Can it instantly recline its seat to let you escape from someone restraining you from behind?" Frank touched the rib mark on his neck, hesitating. "Pomona, your ceiling collapsed too. But you said your office was on a high floor. Once a high floor starts to collapse, wouldn't the entire building be gone?" Pomona lowered her head deeply. Seeing everyone's reactions, Caleb tapped on the table and said, "Admit it. All of us, including me, are already dead." This time, the silence lasted for several minutes as everyone tried to accept this unbelievable fact. After a moment, Detective Miller was the first to flip over his identity card. Sure enough, it read the liar. The others flipped over their cards one by one. All of them said the liar. "You're very sharp." The lawyer Claire said, giving Caleb an approving look. "But how did you figure out we were all dead?" Caleb pointed to his scratch paper and said it wasn't that hard. "I kept wondering, why is the room sealed? Why are there lines drawn on the walls and floor? Why is there a clock in the middle of the table? And why did the shepherd force us to take an intermission? A normal person consumes about 0.007 cubic meters of air per minute, which is 0.42 cubic meters per hour. There are 10 people in this room, which means the hourly air consumption would be 4.2 cubic meters. According to the shepherd, not only did we sleep in this room for 12 hours, but we also played the game for nearly 1 hour. If you multiply 4.2 cubic meters by 13, you get the number 54.6. Caleb circled the 54.6 on his scratch paper with his pen. "This is the volume of air we should have consumed." He looked around the room again. "But what is the total volume of this room?" The others followed his gaze. The organizer left us a clue. They drew lines on the walls and floor, dividing them into many squares, and the side of each square is about 1 meter long. Caleb pointed to the lines on the wall. The number of squares on the wall is 3 by 4, and on the floor and ceiling, it's 4 by 4. So the length, width, and height of this room are 4 by 4 by 3, which is 48 cubic meters. And how can a 48 cubic meter room hold 50.6 cubic meters of air? Caleb said with a frown, his expression grim. After all this time, the air should be getting thin, but none of us feel any lack of oxygen. Dr. Crane thought for a moment, then took Caleb's scratch paper and pointed to the 49.14 on it. And what does this number mean? Caleb looked at Dr. Crane with a very serious expression and replied, that is also the amount of air that needed to be consumed, but it's calculated for 9 people. 9 people? Dr. Crane was taken aback. There were clearly 10 people in the room consuming air, yet he had calculated for 9? I made a bold assumption, Caleb said expressionlessly. What if the shepherd isn't human? Would we have enough air then? Obviously not. What kind of lunatic are you? Dr. Crane muttered. To make such a bizarre assumption? Is it so hard to understand? Caleb said, pointing to the headless corpse to his right. Dr. Crane, you should know the skull very well. Generally speaking, can a human shatter another person's skull with a single hand? Dr. Crane didn't answer because he knew it was completely impossible. Never mind a human skull, even shattering a rabbit's skull on a table with one hand would be no easy feat. Caleb looked away from the corpse and back at the group. There's not much time left. I've already written down my choice. The rest is up to you. But remember, if even one of your answers is different from mine, everyone present will be punished. The group was terrified. A monster who could kill at will was now about to be voted out by them. Would he accept it? Jax glanced at the shepherd out of the corner of his eye and saw that he remained motionless, his deep gaze piercing through the goat mask. Lost in thought, son of a bitch, I'm all in. Jax waved his hand and wrote down the words, the shepherd. The others hesitated for a moment, then also wrote down their answers. Caleb looked around. Without exception, all of them had written the shepherd. The clock struck 1. The game was over. The shepherd slowly walked forward and said, "Congratulations, everyone. You have survived the game of the liar. I will now personally carry out the punishment on the loser." Before anyone could react, the shepherd pulled a pistol from his coat, turned the barrel to press it against his own heart, and pulled the trigger. An unimaginable bang echoed through the narrow room. In such an enclosed space, the sound had nowhere to go and everyone's ears were ringing. Then, the shepherd clutched his chest and began to scream. The colossal screams quickly overpowered the echo of the gunshot, reverberating through the room and sending a chill down everyone's spine. The shepherd screamed and coughed up blood. A full minute passed before his voice weakened, turning into a painful groan. What the hell? Jack stammered, staring at the shepherd. Is he for real? A few more minutes passed, and the groaning stopped. The 9 people sitting at the table suddenly found they could move their legs again. Dr. Crane was the first to stand up. He walked over to the shepherd, felt for the pulse on his neck, and found it had stopped. "Hey," Dr. Crane shouted at the shepherd's body. "The game's over. How do we get out?" But a silent corpse could offer him no answer. The others slowly got to their feet as well. The room hadn't changed at all, except now there was one more body. So weird. Are we really dead? Candy seemed to still be stuck on this question. She raised her slender hand and gave herself a hard slap. "Ouch," Candy cried out. "It still hurts. Why can you feel pain if you're dead?" Jack shook his head helplessly. "What, have you died before?" "Well," Candy paused for a second. "I guess I haven't. So there you go. Who knows what it's like after you die?" "Looking at this situation, this might just be hell," Jax said, looking at the 2 corpses in the room and feeling a sense of unease. "Not only can I feel pain, I can smell the stench." "So what are we, souls?" the writer Leo asked. Dr. Crane also checked his own body and found that his heartbeat, body temperature, and pulse were all normal. He was breathing normally, yet he didn't seem to be consuming any oxygen. It seemed death truly was a mysterious thing, unexplainable by any medical knowledge. "Whatever we are, I don't want to be trapped in this little room for the rest of my days," Detective Miller said. "Let's find a way out." He walked over to the shepherd and picked up a gun that had fallen beside his hand. The move startled everyone, and they instinctively backed away from him. Detective Miller skillfully opened the chamber, checked it, then ejected the magazine, finding that the gun had only ever had 1 bullet, which was now spent. This was both good news and bad news. The good news was they didn't have to worry about someone using the gun to hurt others. The bad news was they had no way to defend themselves if they encountered other dangers. Jax, however, was much bolder. He reached out and slowly removed the shepherd's mask, revealing the face of a man that was completely rotted. His eyes were rolled back in his head. He was lifeless. What a horrifying face. Claire commented from the side. Caleb had remained in his seat the whole time, neither standing up nor searching for clues. He still felt that something was off. The psychologist Pomona in also hadn't stood up. "What are you thinking about?" Pomona asked, casually covering her nose and mouth. "Me?" Caleb was taken aback. "What, are you going to give me a psychological diagnosis?" "Not at all. Although people as smart as you tend to have some psychological issues, this is hardly the right situation for therapy," Pomona said with a small smile. "I'm just curious what's on your mind." Caleb thought for a moment and said, "I'm thinking about the why." "Why?" Caleb ignored Pomona and instead called out to Drive Crane, asking Doctor, generally, how long can a person survive after being shot in the heart? Dr. Crane turned his head, thought for a moment, and said, "If I remember correctly, after being shot in the heart, a person will lose consciousness within a few seconds. But since death in medical terms refers to brain death, the brain will continue to function for a few more minutes even after they're unconscious." Caleb nodded. "That shepherd guy screamed for several minutes. That means his body is much more resilient than a normal human's, right?" "Yes." He remained fully conscious for several minutes after being shot in the heart. Hearing the conversation between Caleb and the doctor, the others quieted down. It was thanks to this con man's clear thinking that all 9 of them had survived. "So, why do you think that is?" Caleb asked, forming his index finger and thumb into the shape of a gun and placing it against his temple. "Most people would choose to commit suicide like this." He thought for a moment, then moved his hand to point up at his chin. "Or like this." Caleb lowered his hand and pointed to his own heart. "No matter what, a person committing suicide would choose a method that causes the least amount of pain. So why did he aim for his heart?" Jax, who was toying with the goat minus head mask, turned the man's head over and said maybe that bastard's head is even tougher. A single shot might not have killed him. Since he coughed up blood, it proves his body structure is the same as ours, Detective Miller said. No matter how strong he was, a shot to the head at that range would have been fatal. Caleb nodded. "If that's the case, then I can only think of one reason." He pointed to the mask in Jax's hand. "The shepherd chose to shoot himself in the heart, most likely to protect something." "The game is probably not over yet." Jax was stunned. "Are you saying he was afraid of damaging his own mask?" "Exactly." At Caleb's instruction, Jax turned the sheepskin mask over, revealing the rough inner lining to everyone. Rotten, sour stench emanated from it. Just as Caleb suspected, there were words written in black ink on the inside of the mask. Some parts were stained with blood, but Jax didn't care. He grabbed his Team Ines shirt and wiped it clean, and the writing finally became legible. "What the hell?" Jax muttered, then began to read the words aloud in his non-minus standard Mandarin. "I am the Hound. You are cursed. I hope you survive. The clock never stops. Danger on all sides. If you want to live, turn toward your hometown 100 times. By the way, they say bamboo shoots sprout after the rain, so why aren't they afraid of being hit by the rain? See you after the rain." Caleb frowned slightly. It was a clue for the next game, just as he thought. This shadow of death hanging over them just wouldn't dissipate. They were already dead, but did they have to die again? "Hey, Command, what does this mean?" Jax asked. "How should I know?" Caleb snorted. "There are 9 people here. Do I have to be the only one who thinks?" The lawyer, Claire, slowly sat down in a chair and said, "I hate to admit it, but your way of thinking is very much in sync with the organizer. If you have any ideas, you should probably just say them." Before Caleb could speak, the surrounding walls suddenly began to change. To everyone's astonishment, holes began to appear out of thin air. The once solid concrete walls now seemed like a constantly shifting soft substance. A moment later, neat rows of holes were arranged on the walls, as if they had been there all along. At the same time, the sound of chains being pulled echoed from all 4 sides. "What's happening?" The group panicked instantly. "Look at the ceiling," someone screamed. Everyone looked up and saw that the ceiling was also riddled with holes. Caleb finally stood up, took the sheepskin mask from Jax, and carefully read the last sentence on it. "See you after the rain." "Rave." Jax tiptoed over to the wall and peered into one of the holes. He was so frightened that he stumbled back several steps. "Holy shit," he yelled, looking for a place to hide, but there was nowhere to go. "What is it? What's inside?" Paige asked, her voice trembling with fear. Everyone knew Jax was a brave guy. For him to be so scared, it had to be something terrible. "Holy Mother," Jax shouted. "It's harpoons. The holes are full of retracting harpoons." "Retracting? What does that mean?" Dr. Crane asked, confused. "They're probably being cocked," Caleb said. "We've been hearing the sound of chains since just now." Now these harpoons are all loaded and could be fired at any moment. Hey, come in, think of something quick. Jax rushed over to Caleb, saying anxiously, if they fire from all sides at once, where are we supposed to hide? Caleb thought for a moment. Surviving on his own wouldn't be difficult after all, there were already 2 corpses here. The penetrating power of a harpoon was limited. He just needed to pile the 2 bodies in a corner and hide behind them. He might get injured, but his chances of survival would be high. It'll probably be very difficult for everyone to survive this time. I need to protect myself too, so I won't be saving you again, Caleb said quietly. You, Jack started to say, but stopped himself, turning to Detective Miller and Drive Crane for help. But those 2 seemed even more helpless. Caleb looked at the clues on the sheepskin mask again. Had he misunderstood? Was this game only truly over when just 1 person was left? If he kept trying to keep everyone alive, these deadly games would just keep coming. After all, this room was bizarre, the walls could change at any moment. This didn't seem to follow any scientific principles, it was more like magic. But if the organizer was some powerful being who could perform magic, why bother tormenting 9 dead people? Was this some kind of twisted game conducted by an institution that managed souls? As Caleb was lost in thought, Pomona, the psychologist, looked at the mask in his hand and spoke up. It says, there's a way for us to survive on here. It says to turn towards your hometown 100 times. The group calmed down slightly and began to ponder this sentence. Does it mean we face the direction of our hometown and spin in circles? Candy asked. I don't think so, Jack said, shaking his head. How are you supposed to know which way your hometown is in this room? Besides, spinning around 100 times won't do anything but make you dizzy. I don't care. I'm trying it, Candy said, picking a random direction and starting to spin. Caleb thought for a moment, knowing it couldn't be that simple. If the phrase "the rules are absolute" still applied to this second game, then the writing on the mask was the solution. But how to decipher it? And when would the harpoons fire? The clock never stops. Could it be at 1/4 the hour? Caleb turned to look at the clock on the table. It was already 1/5. If the harpoons were set to fire at 1/4, then they had less than 10 minutes left. Turn toward your hometown 100 times. The 9 people here were from all different places. Besides, 100 times was no small number. If their line of thinking was wrong, they would easily waste these 10 minutes. But in this room, apart from themselves, what else was there that could turn? Caleb's gaze fell on the clock in the center of the table. He leaned forward and gently touched the clock, only to find it was firmly fixed to the table, completely immovable. The clock doesn't move. Could it be the chairs? Caleb looked down at the chair beneath him. It was an old, ordinary chair that smelled of mildew, just sitting on the floor with no mechanism. In that case, the only thing left was... Caleb looked at the round table in the center of the room and realized there was something strange about it. The table couldn't really be called round. It seemed to be a polygon, but with so many sides that the first impression was that it was round. He reached out and tried to turn the tabletop. Sure enough, a faint sound of chains came from within the table. But the table was heavy. Caleb used considerable force, but could only move it a few centimeters. 100 turns. This was a number that couldn't be achieved by just 2 or 3 people. The 9 of them would need to work together to turn the tabletop to have a shot at survival. Pomona keenly noticed Caleb's action and called for everyone to stop. They all came over to the table and saw that it could indeed be turned. You've got a short line command, Jack said with a nod. We turned this table 100 times and it should open the invisible door. Caleb glanced at the clock again. Although time was tight, the problem had become more straightforward. Turn this round table 100 times in the direction of their hometown. That meant there were only 2 possible answers, left or right. But everyone's hometowns were in different directions, east, south, west, and north. How could they determine whether to turn it left or right? Caleb, do you know when the harpoons will fire? Pomona asked, covering her nose and mouth. The clue says time never stops for 1/4 hour, so I guess it will be at 1-15, Caleb said quietly. Hearing this, X's face changed. Doesn't that mean we have less than 10 minutes left? Let's hurry up and start turning. Dr. Crane pushed the corpse off the table and sat down, testing the weight of the table. But we only have 1 chance, he said, to turn a table this heavy 100 times. What if we go the wrong way? Well, that's still a 50% chance of survival, Jack said anxiously. If we don't do anything, we're dead for sure. If we start turning, we at least have a 50% chance of living. Let's hurry. With that, he used all his strength to start turning the table to the left. Although Jax looked slender, he was very strong. By himself, he managed to turn the table half a circle. What are you all standing around for? Holy shit, help me, Jax yelled at the others. The others knew Jax was right and had no choice but to help him turn it. With no right answer, they just had to take a gamble. But Caleb remained still. He didn't know which way to think. Left or right? Why was the keyword hometown? They were all Chinese, so is it east? North is up, south is down, west is left, east is right. So the answer was right, but what about the people who lived in the west? Or maybe everyone's hometown was related to the ancient text Zuo's won the commentary of Zuo, which has left in its title, so the answer was left. Caleb closed his eyes. He had been planning to use the 2 corpses to shield himself, but if everyone else died, what would he do when the next game came? It's not time to give up on them yet. Caleb thought to himself. He reached out, grabbed a piece of white paper from the spinning table, picked up a pen, stood up and walked to the side. He found an empty spot, sat down, and began to write furiously. Although the others were confused, they didn't stop what they were doing. They had already turned the table more than 10 times. If he hadn't introduced himself as a con man, I would have thought the guy was a mathematician, Jax said to Candy next to him. Candy was still a bit dizzy from her earlier spinning and could only nod perfunctorily. This time, Caleb wasn't writing out equations. He was sketching a rough map of the country on the paper. Hometown. His mind raced, and he suddenly had an idea. Wait. Caleb's eyes widened. If the organizer is so powerful that they can find people with similar experiences from so many different provinces, then does that mean the provinces themselves are a key point? He turned his head and looked at the others turning the table, asking seriously, did any of you lie about your hometown earlier? Everyone shook their heads. After all, hometown was tied to one's accent and manner of speaking. Lying about it would be easy to expose. Good, Caleb nodded slightly. Now please, tell me your hometowns again one by one. Detective Miller was the first to speak. I'm from Inner Mongolia. Caleb drew a black dot in the location of Inner Mongolia. I'm from Sichuan, the lawyer Claire said coldly. I'm from Shanxi, Candy said. Dolly Yunnan, the kindergarten teacher Paige, said. Guangdong, Jack said. Ninkia, the psychologist Pomona, said. I work in Jiangsu, Dr. Crane said. Caleb marked everyone's hometown on the map one by one, then added his own, Shandong. At this point, all eyes were on the writer, Leo, because he had never said where he was from. Leo, are you from Guangxi or Taiwan? Leo was stunned. How did you know? Time is short. Just answer me first. I'm from Guangxi. Caleb nodded. At this point, there were only 2 provinces left for Leo. The Guangxi Autonomous Region in Taiwan Province. If his answer wasn't one of these 2, then he would have told a massive lie. Fortunately, he told the truth. Caleb marked the last province on the map. There were now 9 black dots on his sketch. Just as I thought. Caleb said in a low voice, stop, turn it to the right. Right? Caleb quickly ran to the table, threw the paper down, and began to turn the tabletop in the opposite direction. Although the others were confused, they started turning with him. Dr. Crane looked at the map and the 9 black dots on the table. White, right? Caleb, struggling to turn the table, explained the locations of Ninkia and Shandong can be connected to form a horizontal line. Inner Mongolia, Sichuan, and Yunnan can form a slash, and the 4 points for Guangxi, Guangdong, Shaanxi, and Jiangsu can form a square. Together, these form the character for right. No matter where Leo's hometown was in the end, as long as it was either Guangxi or Taiwan, it would form a box shape. So the answer was determined from the very beginning. While speeding up their actions, the others looked at him with strange expressions. Caleb's thinking was too unconventional, yet he had unraveled the mystery twice in a row. This made them start to feel suspicious. Caleb understood this as well and said to the group, don't get the wrong idea. If the next game is about abandoning you to save myself, I will save myself without a second thought. Hearing him say this, the others could only fall silent and grit their teeth as they turned the table. The 9 of them sat around the table, constantly pushing it to the right. How many turns? Jax asked. 20 minus 6, Pomona replied. You can count that? Jax blinked. This table looks the same all the way around. I'm counting using the bloodstains on the table, Pomona said seriously. Counting is very important for a psychologist. Caleb frowned. Not even 30 turns yet. We need to hurry. The group fell silent and quick and their pace. But the table became harder and harder to move, as if the chains inside were getting tighter and tighter. Holy shit, what's going on? Jack said through gritted teeth. This is too heavy. Keep going. Maybe it's really connected to the door, Candy said, also grimacing. Her words gave the group a glimmer of hope amidst their despair. Bathed, or if this room could conjure holes out of thin air, why couldn't it conjure a door? Everyone's arms were aching, but they kept turning the table, one circle after another. Don't give up, everyone. Only 5 turns left, Pomona shouted. At this moment, everyone was gritting their teeth and pushing with all their might. No one dared to slack off. Click, clack. As the final turn finished, the table was clearly locked into something. Everyone finally breathed a sigh of relief as the soreness in their arms began to set in. There were only 3 minutes left until 1:15. Where's the door? Jack shouted anxiously. The surrounding walls were unchanged. The cold glint of the harpoons could still be seen in the dark holes. Holy shit, there's no door. Jack's voice was tinged with despair. It was wrong. We guessed wrong, Paige screamed. We should have turned it left, right? We shouldn't have trusted that command. We're all going to die here. Caleb frowned slightly. Wrong? Before anyone could react, the clock in the center of the table suddenly acted strangely. It trembled slightly, then shot out 8 beams of laser light. The 8 beams emanated from the clock, gradually moving to the edge of the table before stopping. To the group's confusion, the clock had precisely divided the table into several equally sized wedges like a pizza. Crish. With a loud noise, the table shattered. The clock in the center now stood alone on a small wooden post. Caleb looked closely. There were 9 small wedges and 1 large one. No, it was better to call them triangles than wedges, since the bottom edge of each tabletop piece was flat. Time was to tithe, and everyone was scrambling. What is this? Leo cried out. Why did the table break? At that moment, Detective Miller noticed that the back of each wedge had a handle. Years of professional experience made him instantly understand. They're shields. He picked up the largest wedge and held it in front of him. We can use these shields to block the harpoons. Hearing this, the others also picked up the tabletop pieces. Unfortunately, there was only 1 large piece. Everyone else could only grab a small triangle, barely enough to cover their own body. But after just a few seconds, they discovered a problem. How are we supposed to block them? The lawyer, Claire, asked, a rare hint of panic in her voice. If there are harpoons coming from all 4 sides, we can only block one direction. We have to work together, Caleb said, having snapped back to reality. We form a circle and cover each other's backs. Hearing this, the group quickly adjusted their formation and waited quietly. Now they could only hear the sound of each other's breathing. 9 strangers had now become teammates, each one indispensable. At that moment, Caleb inadvertently glanced back at the writer, Leo, and saw that his face was covered in fine beads of sweat. He was trembling all over, looking extremely nervous. Just then, another bell toll echoed from a distant place outside the room. Are you okay? Caleb asked. I might sound fine, Leo said, shaking his head. Hey, Dr. Crane, turn your shield upside down, Claire suddenly shouted. Why? Dr. Crane asked, looking at the shield in his hand. He was holding it with the pointed end down and the wide end up. You can't cover my legs like that, Claire said nervously. I'll get shot. If I turn it upside down, I can't cover my head, Dr. Crane retorted. What's more important, your head or your legs? Some of the others, hearing their argument, thought Dr. Crane had a point and actually turned their shields around. Pointed end down, wide end up. This created a bizarre situation. The harpoons flying from all directions would only be blocked in the upper half, meaning everyone's legs would be injured. Is this really the right way? Paige asked, stunned. Even if we can hide our legs behind the pointed end and block the front, what about the harpoons coming from behind? And what about the ones from above? I'll block the top, Detective Miller said, raising his huge shield. Everyone get closer, I'll protect you. It had to be said that this method seemed like the best solution now. The largest shield held by one person to block the top, while the others blocked the sides. But Caleb still felt something was wrong. Pomona thought quickly and said, the rest of us should arrange our shields in an up minus and minus down pattern. We can stagger ourselves. Yes, that makes sense, Jax agreed. No, Caleb interrupted them. If everyone's shields are perpendicular to the harpoons, they'll be too easily pierced. Then what do you suggest, mate? Jax asked. Caleb's gaze fell on the sheepskin mask on the floor. Why are bamboo shoots afraid of being hit by the rain? The last clue made Caleb thoughtful. Wait, give me a little more time, Caleb said with a frown. Everyone held their breath, watching the seconds tick by. There was only a minute left before the harpoons would fire. Forget him, Dr. Crane barked. Let's just do, as Pomona said, staggered formation. You shut your damn mouth, you piece of shit, Jack shouted back. I trust what the con man says. You, Dr. Crane gritted his teeth and swallowed his words. What did the big shield and the small shields mean? No. Caleb's eyes suddenly widened. It's a lie. The big shield will get us killed. What? Detective Miller looked at Caleb, confused. Detective, throw away the big shield. Go grab the last small shield. Everyone, points up. Although they were a bit skeptical, most of them were too panicked to think and could only do as they were old for the time being. Dr. Crane thought for a moment, then also turned his shield point minus up. After a few seconds of hesitation, Detective Miller also picked up a last small shield. "Everyone, get down," Caleb continued. "Move the points back and press them together. Detective, you don't need to block the top either, join us." Under Caleb's command, they actually managed to arrange all wedges together, forming a cone. No one had ever imagined that after discarding the large shield, all the small shields would fit together perfectly to form a pyramid, covering all sides and the top. From a distance, the cone looked like a bamboo shoot waiting for a heavy rain to come. In the dark space, everyone's heart pounded nervously. Only the sound of breathing echoed among them. "It's coming." Caleb calculated the time in his head and gave a quiet signal. The next second, all they heard was the sound of wind dripping through the air as something unseen slammed violently against the shield in Caleb's hand. Then the sounds from all directions came like a torrential storm. The force of the harpoons was surprisingly strong. Everyone felt their arms being jolted with pain, almost losing their grip on their shields. Fortunately, all their shields were now pressed together, creating a delicate balance. Oh! The shield in front of Paige was suddenly pierced by a harpoon, making her scream. Caleb turned his head and saw that the harpoon had stopped just 2 or 3 centimeters from Paige's eyes. If the shield hadn't been tough enough, Paige would be dead now. "Hold on," Detective Miller shouted. "The number of harpoons is limited. If we can hold on for just a little longer, we'll survive." Before anyone could answer, they heard another scream. They turned to see it was Candy. She wasn't as lucky, as Paige, a piercing harpoon had gone through her palm. Candy lost her strength for a moment, and the shield in front of her was knocked askew by the whistling harpoons. "Look out!" Jax gritted his teeth and reached out to grab the shield in front of Candy. In that instant, a harpoon shot through the gap with perfect accuracy, piercing through Leo's shoulder. Leo let out a painful scream, but his hand still gripped the shield tightly. "Don't panic." Detective Miller reached out to support Leo, then spread his hands to hold up half of the shield for him. Jax also acted decisively, reaching out to hold up the shield for Candy. Fortunately, these two men were very strong, and the entire formation became stable again. As the sound of impacts gradually subsided, everyone began to understand just how rational this formation was. If they had followed Detective Miller's and Drive Crane's idea of holding the shields in a staggered formation, the shields would have been perpendicular to the harpoons and extremely easy to pierce. Now, the bamboo shoot after the rain shape made it so that the harpoons from all 5 directions hit the shields at an angle, drastically reducing their penetrating power, especially the harpoons coming from directly above, which were now being deflected by the cone shape. After a while, it was completely silent outside the shields. "Is it over?" Leo asked through gritted teeth. "Wait another minute," Caleb replied. The group held the shields and waited quietly for another minute. It was indeed quiet outside. Jax carefully moved a shield to create a gap and peeked out. Holy shit! He was instantly stunned by the sight before him. The others also slowly moved their shields and saw that the floor and the table were almost completely covered in harpoons. And the 2 corpses on the ground were an even more gruesome sight, now looking like 2 hedgehogs densely covered in spikes. Every harpoon was connected to a rope, with the other end of the rope leading to a hole in the wall. The room was a complete mess. Dr. Crane immediately rolled up his sleeves and went over to Leo. His condition was not looking good. A harpoon had pierced his shoulder and needed immediate attention. Leo slowly sat down and said with a bitter laugh, "I was just thinking about how unlucky I have to be. Didn't think I'd actually get hit." Candy's expression was full of guilt, and she quickly apologized to Leo. But everyone knew it wasn't Candy's fault. She had also had her hand pierced by a harpoon. "Hey, pretty lady, come here," Jax said, beckoning with his hand. "I can bandage that for you." Candy was taken aback. "You know how to bandage a wound?" "A little bit." Jax tore a strip of cloth from the dead shepherd's suit and then tore that into 2 smaller strips. He tied one tightly around Candy's arm to stop the bleeding and carefully wrapped the other around the wound. "I used to get hurt a lot when I was on the streets, so I learned some bandaging myself," Jax said. Candy nodded, slightly speechless. After arriving here, the group finally had a moment of peace, as if they had temporarily escaped the shadow of death. But there was still no door in sight. This damned room still had them trapped. Where in the world was this place, and what was outside? Within a minute, a sigh came from Dr. Crane's direction. Caleb turned his head and saw Drive Crane, who was treating Leo's wound, looking troubled. "What is it?" Detective Miller asked. "Is the wound very serious?" "The wound itself isn't serious," Dr. Crane said, shaking his head. "It's just that I can't get the harpoon out." The others crowded around and saw that the problem was indeed very tricky. The tip of the harpoon was barbed. Pulling it out would cause even greater injury to the victim, and the tail of the harpoon was attached to a rope. At this moment, Leo was like a fish that had been shot, tethered by this rope, no matter where he went. "We have to cut the rope and then pull the harpoon out from the front," Dr. Crane said, looking up. "But I don't have anything sharp." Leo's lips were now a bit pale. The harpoon piercing his shoulder blade was causing him immense pain. "Just use another harpoon," Detective Miller said decisively. "Even though a harpoon is pointed, it still counts as a sharp object." "It's the only way," Dr. Crane agreed. "Ryder, I need you to lie down in the most relaxed position you can. We need to cut the rope on your back. Don't rush, take it slow. Be careful of the harpoon in your front so you don't get a secondary injury." Leo nodded and began to move his body with difficulty. Caleb watched the scene with a growing sense of dissonance. Take it slow? Did they really have time for that in a situation like this? He looked at the ropes covering the floor and his sense of foreboding washed over him. If he guessed correctly, they were still racing against the clock. "You can't take it slow," Caleb suddenly shouted. "Get that harpoon out of him right now." He rushed to the doctor's side and said to Leo with a serious expression, "You're going to have to bear with it. I'm pulling the harpoon out for you right now." Leo was confused, but didn't refuse. "What do you think you're doing?" Dr. Crane shook Caleb angrily. "You'll make his injury worse." "There's no time. If we waste any more time, he's really going to die." Caleb pushed Drive Crane away and grabbed the harpoon on Leo's back. A screamed or threw the room. A barbed harpoon is easy to pierce with, but incredibly difficult to remove. "Hey!" Detective Miller rushed over at this point, pulling Caleb away and yelling angrily, "Are you trying to kill him, kid?" Being blocked twice, Caleb's expression turned ugly. "I understand you want to save him, but if we don't hurry, the harpoons will." Before Caleb could finish, the sound of chains echoed from all sides again, as if some huge mechanism had been activated once more. Following it was Leo's heart-minus wrenching scream. The others finally snapped back to reality and saw that all the harpoons were slowly being reeled back by the ropes. And Leo, on the floor, was now being dragged by an immense force. Caleb had realized this long ago. The ropes on the harpoons weren't just for show, they would eventually be reeled back in. The group scrambled to follow Leo. During the chaos, Detective Miller tried to pull on the rope to fight against the immense force coming from the dark holes, but it was all in vain. The shields on the floor, pierced with harpoons, were now being torn to shreds by the pulling force and also began to retreat. A force that could shred wood was definitely not something that could be resisted with bare hands. Although the pain was unbearable, Leo quickly realized another problem. If he was dragged to the wall and still hadn't freed himself from the harpoon, he would be pinned to the wall to die. Thinking of this, he painfully got to his feet, grabbed Caleb again, and said word by word, "Help me get the harpoon out. Get it out now." Caleb's expression was troubled. He had just tried the barbs on this harpoon were so intricate that it was almost impossible to pull it from the body. Seeing the blood gushing out, Caleb felt a wave of dizziness. Are they really dead? Do dead people also get injured? Caleb composed himself. Now was not the time to think about that. They had to cut the rope immediately. All the harpoons were now slowly retreating. How could they use another harpoon to cut his rope? The only thing he could be sure of was that when all the ropes had retracted into the wall, all the harpoons would disappear and Leo would die. We have to find a way to get one harpoon. But how? Caleb's brow furrowed as he quickly scanned his surroundings. He could only take another gamble. He grabbed two slowly retreating harpoons from the floor and quickly tied their ropes together in a dead knot. "Hey, stop crowding around Leo," Caleb shouted. "Do as I do. We need to keep at least one harpoon." Pomona instantly understood his meaning. She also found the harpoons and tied a knot with a clean, swift motion. But the shape of her knot was strange, something Caleb had never seen before. He didn't have time to think about it, he could only focus on the two harpoons in front of him. As the ropes continued to retract, the two ropes were now pulled taut against each other. At this rate, it wouldn't be long before one of the ropes snapped, leaving one harpoon behind. Caleb slowly backed away. The two ropes were now making a frightening sound. If he guessed correctly, the snapped rope could injure someone under such immense tension. Sure enough, the next second, one of the ropes snapped with a loud crack. The other rope with the harpoon attached whipped through the air randomly for a few moments before slamming hard onto the ground, leaving a deep gash. Caleb rushed forward, trying to untie the knot before the harpoon was retracted into the wall. But he now found that the two ropes, which had been tied together, were now completely deformed due to the immense pulling force. Never mind untying the knot, it was hard to even make out the shape of the rope. "I've got one," Pomona shouted from not far away. "Someone with strength, hurry and help cut the rider's rope." "You got it?" Caleb looked over and saw that the knot Pomona had tied was so clever that it had automatically come apart when the rope snapped. Detective Miller, who hadn't even finished tying his first knot, heard this and immediately dropped the harpoons in his hands. "I'll cut it. Give it to me," he said. After taking the harpoon, Detective Miller rushed over in 3 large strides, reaching Leo's back just as he was about to be pulled to the wall. Fortunately, although the harpoon in his hand had a pointed tip, was also finely edged, enough to be used as a small knife. Jack saw this and also went to help. Although Caleb had thought of the method first, Leo was now less than half a meter from the wall. The tearing pain made it impossible for Leo to resist. He could only let himself be pulled back slowly, otherwise the barbed hook in his chest would cause him unbearable pain. Detective Miller grabbed the rope behind him, thought for a moment, and aimed for the part of the rope closest to Leo's body and began to cut with the sharp harpoon. His hands were steady, and every cut landed precisely on the rope. But the rope was tougher than he had imagined. After several cuts, there was only a small nick. He quickly sized up the situation and realized things were tricky. Although the rope would eventually be cut, what they lacked most now was time. In less than a minute, Leo's body would touch the wall, and then it would be impossible to cut the rope from behind. "Holy shit, are you done yet?" Jax asked anxiously. "You're so slow, you're going to get this bastard killed." "Shut up," Detective Miller snapped, then continued to apply more force. As Leo's body got closer and closer to the wall, fine beads of sweat had already formed on the detective's face. It had to be said that his mental fortitude was very strong. Although the air was thick with tension and pressure, he hadn't made a single mistake with the small harpoon. Every cut landed on the previous nick. But with Leo, now less than 30 centimeters from the wall, Detective Miller's arm could barely move. Jax, quick-minus-witted, immediately blocked the space behind Leo, using his own body as a cushion. This way, although Leo would be hurt sooner, the distance between him and the wall would not change for a short period of time. "Cop, hurry!" Detective Miller held his breath and continued to cut. At this point, the rope was more than half cut but still connected. Leo continued to groan in pain. The harpoon, having pierced through his body, was now using its barbs to dig back into his chest. His clothes were now soaked with blood, a horrifying sight. "Am I going to die?" Leo said through gritted teeth. "I'm really going to die, aren't I? Who on earth wants us dead? Act like a man," Detective Miller said sternly. "So many people are trying to save you. Don't you start whining on me." Hearing this, Leo immediately fell silent. He knew Detective Miller was right. Everyone here was running around for him. He couldn't be the one to drag them down. The barbs dug deep into Leo's flesh. He let out a muffled grunt, constantly biting his teeth. Dr. Crane saw this and immediately stuffed a strip of cloth into his mouth. After all, a person in extreme pain might bite through their own teeth. The group surrounded Leo. The short 20 seconds felt like hours as Detective Miller methodically cut the rope. Finally, with one last slice, the tough rope was severed. At the same time, both Leo and Jax fell to the ground from the loss of tension. The others immediately rushed forward to support them. It seemed Leo's life had been saved. Dr. Crane immediately pulled Leo aside and began to check his wound. His condition was as expected. The harpoon still needed to be pulled out from the front. The most difficult problem now was stopping the bleeding. Dr. Crane thought for a long time before finally stuffing several strips of cloth into the wound around the harpoon on Leo. "Hey, doctor, aren't you going to take the harpoon out for him?" Jax asked. "I can't. If I do, he'll die," Dr. Crane said, his expression grim. "Die?" Jax was confused. He went up and shoved Dr. Crane. "What the hell? We went through all that effort, and now you're not going to save him?" "I am saving him." Dr. Crane pushed Jix's hand away impatiently. "To put it bluntly, he can only live if this harpoon stays in him." "Why?" Paige, who was standing nearby, couldn't help but ask. "If the harpoon is removed, all he'll have is a constantly bleeding wound. Death would just be a matter of time," Dr. Crane answered calmly. "If we leave the harpoon in for now, although he'll be in immense pain, at least he won't die from excessive blood loss. The small wounds will soon stop bleeding temporarily as the blood clots." Although the others didn't know much about medicine, they generally understood what Dr. Crane meant. For them now, pulling out a harpoon was easy, suturing a wound was hard. Ryder's life has been saved for now. The only thing we need to do is get out of here as soon as possible and find a place with the proper facilities to treat his wound again. Dr. Crane's words pulled everyone's thoughts back to reality. If they couldn't leave this bizarre room, their fate would sooner or later be the same as Leo's. "But how do we leave? Is the game over?" Pomona asked, covering her nose and mouth. Caleb thought for a moment and shook his head. The mask had clearly stated that the person called the Hound hoped they would survive and said, "See you after the rain." Logically, after this storm, minus like barrage of harpoons, the minus called Hound should appear. He might bring the next game, but why hadn't he appeared? Hey, come man, Jack slowly walked over to Caleb, his expression serious. You have a way to survive, don't you? So, Caleb replied coldly, what does my survival have to do with you? I'm not as smart as you. I can only find someone to team up with. Jack seemed to be recommending himself. You've got the brains, I've got the brawn. Let's work together. Hearing this, Caleb frowned slightly. Sorry, I'm a command. I don't plan on trusting anyone but myself. Before Jax could say anything else, a question came from Detective Miller's direction. What is this? The group turned to look and saw Detective Miller carefully examining the harpoon in his hand. What is it? Dr. Crane approached him and asked carefully. There's writing on it, Detective Miller said, handing the harpoon to Drive Crane. Dr. Crane took it and looked. His expression changed. On the finger minus thick tail of the harpoon, there were indeed tiny characters, I am the shepherd. If you can see this message, it means you have survived. But how many of you have survived? Is anyone injured? I am truly very worried about you. I cannot just stand by and watch you die. In a quarter of an hour, death will descend from the sky again. Dodge them. Find a way to survive. Dr. Crane gritted his teeth and then fiercely threw the harpoon to the ground. Are you fucking kidding me? It never ends. He roared, seeming to want to release all the emotions he had been suppressing.